In this episode, we start by making accountability feel concrete, because new learners often hear words like culture and responsibilities and assume they are vague management topics. On the CDPSE exam, these topics are practical and testable because the exam treats privacy as a team activity that only works when ownership is clear, escalation paths exist, and people know what they must do when handling personal information. If roles are fuzzy, privacy controls become inconsistent, requests get mishandled, incidents drag on, and documentation becomes unreliable because no one owns the work. A mature privacy program does not rely on heroic individuals. It relies on a structure that makes the right behavior the normal behavior, even when teams are busy or when staff changes. This is why the exam places governance and operations early, because without them, risk management and technical controls do not stay aligned over time. You will learn how roles fit together, how responsibilities are assigned across teams, and how culture turns written expectations into everyday habits. By the end, you should be able to recognize what role clarity looks like, what a healthy privacy culture produces, and what evidence shows accountability is truly real. A useful first step is to separate role titles from role functions, because titles vary widely across organizations, but functions remain fairly consistent. Some organizations have a Chief Privacy Officer, CPO, others have Privacy Counsel, others have a small privacy team inside compliance, and some distribute privacy responsibility through security and product teams. The exam is not testing whether you know the perfect org chart, but whether you understand the work that must happen and the boundaries of who should make which decisions. For example, someone must define privacy requirements and interpret obligations. Someone must embed those requirements into processes and designs. Someone must monitor whether controls operate, and someone must handle exceptions and escalation. Someone must also coordinate with security, legal, product, engineering, operations, and procurement, because privacy touches all of them. When roles are designed around functions, accountability becomes clearer because you can name who owns policy, who owns operational workflows, who owns technical implementation, and who owns evidence and monitoring. A beginner-friendly way to think is that privacy leadership sets direction, privacy operations ensures processes run, engineers and product teams implement controls, and oversight roles verify and report. When you can explain functions and handoffs, you can handle most exam questions about roles even if the scenario uses unfamiliar job titles. Privacy governance usually includes a combination of decision-makers, advisors, and implementers, and knowing how they interact is essential for accountability. Decision-makers are the people who can approve risk acceptance, define standards, and allocate resources, because without authority, privacy requirements cannot be enforced. Advisors include people who interpret laws, translate principles into requirements, and guide teams on best practices, but they do not necessarily own implementation. Implementers include teams that build systems, manage data, run workflows, and enforce controls day to day. Oversight functions include monitoring and auditing activities that provide evidence, identify gaps, and ensure continuous improvement. The exam often tests that a privacy program should not be purely advisory, because advice without authority and follow-through does not produce reliable outcomes. It also tests that implementation cannot be left solely to technical teams without clear privacy requirements, because that leads to inconsistent choices. A strong governance structure has defined decision points, clear approval responsibilities, and a documented way to handle exceptions. When you see a scenario where a team is unsure what to do, the correct answer often involves clarifying ownership and establishing a process, not just choosing a single control. Responsibility assignment is one of the most practical aspects of this domain because privacy obligations require action across the full data lifecycle. Someone must own data inventory and classification, because without a map of personal information, rights handling and incident response become guesswork. Someone must own privacy assessments and their follow-up actions, because assessments are only valuable when they change decisions and result in implemented controls. Someone must own vendor management from a privacy perspective, including contract requirements, due diligence, and monitoring, because vendors can expand risk quickly. Someone must own the rights request process, including identity verification, workflow execution, and response quality. Someone must own incident response coordination because incidents require rapid decisions about impact, obligations, and communication. Someone must also own training and awareness because roles and processes fail when people do not understand them. The exam may describe missing ownership, such as no one knowing who should respond to a request and ask what should be established. Accountability becomes real when each major privacy process has an owner and a backup, a documented procedure, and measurable evidence of operation. Culture can feel abstract, but in privacy engineering it has a very specific meaning. Whether people behave in ways that reduce privacy risk even when no one is watching. A healthy privacy culture shows up when teams ask permission before reusing data for a new purpose, when they escalate uncertainty early rather than hiding it, and when they treat personal information as an asset with responsibilities attached. It also shows up when privacy is included in planning, not only in last-minute reviews, and when people understand that privacy is a quality attribute of a system, like reliability or safety. The exam may test culture through scenario clues, like a team that routinely copies production data into testing or treats privacy notices as meaningless, because those behaviors signal a weak culture. A strong culture is reinforced by leadership, training, incentives, and consistent enforcement of standards. It is also reinforced by making privacy the easy path, such as providing templates, clear procedures, and support channels that reduce friction. Culture is important because it determines whether the formal privacy program is lived or ignored. When you think of culture as behavior patterns and decision habits, it becomes testable and practical. One of the most important cultural mechanisms is the way privacy is integrated into normal workflows, because that is where accountability becomes routine rather than exceptional. If privacy review is an optional step, it will be skipped under time pressure, and the program will be inconsistent. If privacy requirements are embedded into product development gates, procurement onboarding, data access approval, and change management, then privacy becomes part of how work is done. The exam often tests for this kind of integration because it is a reliable indicator of maturity. For example, when a new vendor is introduced, a mature organization has a required privacy review, contract requirements, and monitoring expectations, and it does not depend on someone remembering to ask. When a new feature uses personal information, a mature organization triggers an assessment and documentation updates automatically through the development process. When a data flow changes, a mature organization updates inventories and notices as part of change management. Embedding privacy into workflows also reduces errors because it creates consistent checkpoints. This is how culture and structure meet, because good structure makes good behavior easy and repeatable. Another key aspect of accountability is escalation and decision-making clarity, especially when there are trade-offs or conflicts. Privacy engineering often involves balancing privacy outcomes with operational needs, such as retention requirements, fraud prevention, or business timelines. When conflicts occur, the organization must have a clear path for escalating decisions to the appropriate authority, and those decisions must be documented. The exam may test this by offering answers that suggest individual employees make ad hoc choices versus answers that route decisions through defined governance. Escalation paths matter during incidents, when time is short and decisions about notification, containment, and public communication must be made quickly. They also matter during rights requests, when exceptions or unusual situations require careful reasoning. A mature program defines who can accept residual risk, who must be consulted, and who must be informed. It also defines how exceptions are recorded and reviewed, so the organization can learn and improve rather than repeating the same mistakes. When escalation is clear, accountability becomes real because decisions have owners and evidence. Training and awareness are often treated as soft topics, but the exam treats them as essential controls that connect roles and culture to consistent behavior. Training should be role-based, meaning people who handle data directly need practical guidance. People who design systems need design-oriented expectations, and leaders need decision-oriented understanding. Awareness programs should reinforce key habits, such as minimizing data, respecting purpose limits, handling requests correctly, and escalating incidents promptly. The exam may test whether you can identify when training is insufficient, such as when repeated privacy errors occur or when teams misunderstand what counts as personal information. Training is also a way to make accountability visible, because training completion and comprehension checks can become evidence that the organization took reasonable steps to enable compliance. Another important idea is that training must be maintained over time, because organizational change brings new staff and new systems. Culture improves when training is consistent, not occasional. When training is tied to processes and reinforced by leadership, it becomes part of how the organization stays privacy-ready. Accountability also depends on metrics and monitoring, because if no one measures whether processes work, the program can drift into failure without noticing. Metrics might include rights request response times, incident response timelines, training completion rates, vendor review completion, and assessment follow-through. Monitoring might include periodic audits of access control behavior, reviews of data inventories for completeness, and checks that retention rules are being followed. The exam may test whether you understand that measuring is not the same as controlling, but it is a necessary part of proving controls operate and identifying gaps. It can also test whether you choose metrics that leaders can act on rather than metrics that are easy to count but meaningless. Monitoring reinforces culture because it signals that privacy is taken seriously and that standards matter. It also supports continuous improvement, because the organization can identify patterns of failure and fix root causes. In a mature program, metrics and monitoring connect directly to ownership, because someone is accountable for improving outcomes when metrics show problems. This is how accountability becomes measurable rather than symbolic. A frequent pitfall is creating a privacy structure that looks impressive but does not work in practice because responsibilities are not aligned with authority and resources. If a privacy role is responsible for outcomes but has no ability to influence product decisions, enforce standards, or require documentation, accountability becomes a blame game rather than a functioning system. If privacy responsibilities are distributed but no one coordinates across teams, gaps appear, especially at boundaries like vendor onboarding, data sharing, and incident escalation. The exam may test this by presenting a program with unclear lines of authority and asking what improvement is most important. Often the correct answer involves establishing a clear governance model, defining decision rights, and embedding privacy into workflows so teams cannot bypass it. Another pitfall is relying too heavily on a single expert, because organizational change will break the program when that person leaves. Durable accountability requires redundancy, documented processes, and shared understanding. When you study, keep asking whether the program design would still work if the key person quit tomorrow. If it would not, accountability is not real yet. As we close, defining privacy roles, culture, and responsibilities so accountability is real means building a privacy operating model where ownership is clear, workflows reinforce expected behavior, and evidence proves that privacy controls are functioning. Titles matter less than functions, but the functions must be covered, including setting requirements, implementing controls, monitoring outcomes, and handling exceptions and escalation. A healthy privacy culture is visible through behavior, such as asking before repurposing data, escalating uncertainty early, and treating personal information as an asset with responsibilities attached. Embedding privacy into normal workflows makes accountability routine, while clear escalation paths ensure trade-offs and crises are handled consistently and documented. Training and awareness support role clarity and culture by giving people practical guidance, and metrics and monitoring make accountability measurable by showing whether processes work over time. The CDPSE exam rewards this domain because privacy engineering succeeds or fails based on how organizations organize responsibility and sustain it through change. When you can explain who owns which privacy processes, how culture is reinforced, and what evidence proves accountability, you demonstrate the kind of practical maturity the exam is designed to measure.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.